friends, this is Aromie here. Welcome back to our live Baxter DLC. We are here thanking Baxter for taking us out tonight. Your fingers twined together in your lap. You still felt shy calling it a day out loud, so you didn't. Oh, I was wondering why my girl didn't say anything about it. And honestly, surprised you that Baxter had been able to get seats at such short notice. It seemed like the place was pretty popular. The performance you'd watch had been a full house. Unable to hide your curiosity, you put the question to the man himself. I think whatever Baxter wants, he gets. Where exactly did you get the tickets for this? Instantly, Baxter's face tensed, his easygoing smile losing some of its effortlessness and tugging down at the corners. That, of course. He crossed his arms in a way that struck you as mildly defensive. Maybe you remember the friends of my parents, the ones I visited recently. Well, it just so happens that they're in the performance business. Theater, ballet, musicals, all kinds of productions. They specialize in large-scale events of that nature. This venue isn't one of theirs, but they were able to pull some strings on my behalf.
Of course.
It's a question of knowing the right people who know the right people. We could have even had full backstage access with the main cast if I'd asked. As it was, we were singled out for some special attention during the show on account of being seated at the bar. I'll have to remember to thank them for that. I'm sure they'd be pleased to know that our date went well too. Oh. Man, Baxter will go lengths for you, bro. You couldn't help it, your eyes widened a little. You hadn't figured that Baxter would have that kind of pull. Seeing your response, Baxter's features chilled further, his brows knitting together. He shrugged his shoulders and sighed. Oh my god, he's so cute. I do try not to lean on that kind of thing too much if you can't believe me. I appreciate it might not look like it now. You could say it's a means for me to preserve my sense of independence. It's easy to be popular if you can't foot the bill. And I don't want that to be what draws others to me. But after all that, here I am, leaning on the same old crutch. Nothing has changed since I was 6. How quaint, how wonderful, how truly excellent. As he rambled on, Baxter was speaking more and more inwardly, his tone increasingly acrid. Acrid? Is this really any better than yesterday? What have I achieved? You could only sit and listen as the brief tirade continued. Had Baxter been sitting on this ever since the coffee shop? What? Sitting on what? About his life? It was true, he hadn't come across as satisfied by reassurance, only by a second chance. But if he had known it'd only make him feel worse, you wouldn't have let it get this far. Baxter managed to snap out of his train of thought, his attention returning to you. He looked rather sheepish.
Forgive me.
I'm sorry, Michiko. Perhaps it would be best to call it a night. I wouldn't want to sour the evening after such a charming show. He swiftly rose from his bar stool, mind made up. You didn't stop him. Attempting the conversation in a public place wasn't a wise plan. Instead, you hurried to follow. Crossing the floor towards the exit, you passed the bartender and a few other cast members. You quickly expressed your appreciation to them and got cheery waves and things in return. Sounds and colors became a blur, and before long you had stepped out into the street. Baxter was already a few paces down the block, heading for his car, but he stopped for you to catch up. You exchanged a few pleasantries on the journey home, but nothing too involved. Baxter was making an effort to keep the conversation light, just as he'd promised. He really didn't want to leave a bad impression. That much was clear. You used the time and the space between sentences to mull things over. There was something that needed to be done, but you couldn't figure out what you could say. In your imagined scenarios, it would all end up the same way, with him appreciating sentiment while not believing. Mood swings, bro. It was hard to think clearly. Your head was full of the smell of fake cocktails and snatches of remembered music, like the show and your life blending together in the shake of a mixer. You sank down into the soft leather of the car seat and let the images wash over you in waves. The stars were winking playfully overhead as you arrived back in your own neighborhood. The moon was a yellow lantern floating up high. You stepped out of Baxter's car and a sea breeze danced across your cheeks. After the summer heat of the daytime, it was cool and refreshing, like the first sharp sip of an iced drink. Baxter escorted you to the front door. He was as ever determined to be a gentleman. The deliberateness of it gave you pause in a way that it hadn't until now. He lifted— oh my god, do not give me the eyes. Look away. He lifted the corners of his mouth and his eyes wrinkled, a perfectly arranged smile. Good night, Michiko. I had a wonderful time. The manner he said it sounds less like he was expressing his feelings and more like he was stating a want, as if he was determined that it should be true. Oh, I'm kind of hurt. My feelings are kind of mixed right now. Ever since his dip in the mood at the end of the event, your mind has been filled with thoughts that you couldn't grasp hold of. Those questions pressed against you insistently. Why was he still beating himself up over what happened yesterday? Why did he seem so unlike himself before you left the bar? What was going on in that head of his right now? Having bid you farewell, Baxter moved to leave. There was a priority in making himself scarce. In his eyes, there was something like tiredness, something like fear. I think this is more of a him issue and not a us issue. The prospect of some other suddenly indignity rearing its head was too much for him to bear. He'd lost the chance to save face entirely in front of you by now, but to cut things off at the roots. To see him like that tugged at your chest. You couldn't accept him going back to that empty house to wallow in frustration, but what could you do? Your mouth opened without anything to fill it, but the words somehow came anyway. Would you want to come inside? Things couldn't end here, that much was certain. What you needed was more time. Baxter paused, having turned to go. The far side of him was in the shadow. As he slowly swiveled back to you and the light caught his face once more, his expression was conflicted. It held surprise, confusion, and no small amount of intrigue. His lips parted as if to speak, but his brows furrowed, and he closed his mouth again without a sound. He evidently had no idea where the present moment was leading. Neither did you. Baxter settled for a smile, or not a smile, for a simple tilt of the head, his eyes posing a question. I was thinking, well... Your face began to prickle with embarrassment, a warm front spreading slowly northward. I mean, I wasn't implying anything by it. I only wondered if you'd maybe like to come have a drink with me at my house. Right now? Despite playing it off as nothing serious, you were silently willing Baxter not to go, just a little longer. Hearing your elaboration, Baxter couldn't help but be amused. He recovered from his initial trepidation, enough to laugh at your desperate plan. A drink, you say? A fascinating suggestion. How decidedly original of you. One eyebrow was raised, his voice dripping with irony. He scuffed her shoes against the sidewalk, shy, but still pleased to see him appreciate the unintended absurdity. Baxter's features relaxed into a look of fond regard as his eyes searched her face for a moment. One hand was tucked casually into the back of his pocket. Though some of the tension appeared to be gone, his stance was still one of indecision, contemplation. For some reason, your imagination conjured up a vision of him at a woodland crossroads, standing just as he was now, carefully weighing which way to go. At this point, you felt as though you could guess the thought process he was going through, even if he wasn't saying it out loud. For Baxter, it was all a question of the eventual outcome. When everything was over and he looked back at this moment, how would he best like to remember it? Should he end things here and avoid any further mishaps, or should the night continue with the accompanying risk of additional regrets? Baxter didn't only aim to make the most of his time by doing what he liked, but by meticulously crafting the experiences and emotions he'd have. He sighed inwardly, recalling simpler times. If only it were another case of which frozen dessert to pick from an ice cream truck. At length, his mind was made up. Baxter cleared his throat and straightened his stance, facing you square on.
That's sweet.
Thank you for the offer, Michiko. It's very kind of you to be so generous with your time. I don't know where this is going. Is he going to say no or yes? I should like to take up that suggestion if it's oh, thank God. If it's no inconvenience, a drink would be lovely. A rush of relief hit, thank goodness. You still had a chance to turn things around. He likely had a similar thought, though your ideas on what would achieve that were certainly different. Flashing a cheerful smile, you unlocked your front door and led the way inside. Baxter dutifully followed, pausing only to wipe his shoes on the doormat, just as Small would want. While the lights were on in the living room, there was a brief flash of panic at the prospect that you lured Baxter into a run-in with your family at the worst possible time. As luck would have it, when you poked your head around the doorway, the room was empty, you couldn't hear movement, and you were alone for now. So you gestured for Baxter to sit down and make himself comfortable. He graciously accepted the invitation. Rather than crash on the couch, he sauntered over the table and pulled up a chair, prim and proper to the last. Having got this far, you will the hostly components of your brain into motion. After seeing a professional like the bartender at work, you had some standards to live up to. First things first, the technical reason for why you'd invited him. What do you want to drink? We have juice, milk, other things. Just water, please. I don't have an appetite for much else right now. His reply came without hesitation, but it lacked the usual degree of confidence you'd come to expect from him. The sound of it spoke volumes. While nobody could go so far as to call him fragile, there was no denying that Baxter was a long way from his usual bold self. You nodded an assurance. Water you could do. You reached for a pair of glasses, deciding to stick with water yourself to keep things simple. After pouring some chill water from the fridge, you brought the drinks over to the table and sat down across from Baxter.
Thank you.
Alright, Baxter, what's going on? Or do you not want to talk about it? Because, girlies love to talk about emotions and feelings and everything of that sort. The guys, not really. They rather keep it to themselves. They rather not express it at all. Baxter sipped his water quietly, then placed it back down in front of him. It struck you it struck you fully how bizarre the situation would appear to anyone who happened to be watching. Two people sitting at the dining room table, dressed to the nines, gingerly sampling glasses of plain water. You mentally whispered an apology to the tender of the jazz bar. You were a little ashamed at your feeble imitation of skills. It was a good thing your moms weren't around to see this either. They'd never let you live it down, not in a million years. But that was all besides the point. You knew, and Baxter knew, that the pretext of coming over for a drink was simply that a thinly veiled excuse. Only a very particular kind of emergency would necessitate visiting a neighbor's house for nothing more than a glass of water. And yet, in a way, it had been an emergency. A relationship emergency. Oh, wow, what? An emergency what? Emergency? You sincerely hope that this brief borrowed moment will give you both the chance to clear the air and reach some kind of mutual understanding. Am I missing something here? Did something happen between us? I clearly thought it was just him and then his feelings about himself, not about us. Baxter reached down to fiddle with the tumbler of water before him, though without lifting it to his lips again. He stared down at it, searchingly. After a while, he spoke.
I deeply apologize.
Wait, for what? For suddenly changing your attitude? I feel like I must sound like a broken record at this point, but it's exceedingly considerate of you to extend your hospitality this far. I'm grateful. He's not really looking at us as he's saying this. His gaze didn't lift, but one corner of his mouth did. It looked as though it took some effort. He maintained it just long enough to make sure you'd seen, and then it dropped like a heavy weight. He quietly sighed once, as though to catch his breath. He continued.
To be honest,
I must confess, however, if it were up to me, none of this would be happening. Wait, what? I find myself regretting my actions up to this point. Things would have been for the better if I had not said anything after the show, or if you hadn't treated them as if they mattered. What? It was a brief moment of frustration, and it caused so much trouble, and an evening ruined by nothing in for nothing. And this was already my second go at inviting you out for an occasion. We don't need to retread what happened the first time. He tossed his head to one side and made a bitter sound with his tongue. I should be better than than this. It irks me so much to make the same mistakes over and over. His voice trembled with frustration, his eyes dark and downcast. He dropped to a forceful whisper, repeating the words as if to convince himself of them, as if to nail them to his chest. I was better than this, wasn't I? I don't know. I don't know that you. I just know the Baxter that moved in. Why do you feel like you have to be? I think you're wonderful. You aren't better or worse, you're just yourself. You're acting like the characters in the show, you know? I don't need you to do that, I just want you to talk to me. Baxter, you haven't done anything wrong. These are some good choices. I'm gonna choose. I just want you to talk to me, bro. You steeled your nerve, willing yourself to be bold. That's not any way to deal with your emotions. You shouldn't bottle that kind of thing up and hide it from everyone. Baxter finally lifted his eyes to meet yours. They were narrow. I shouldn't say this. I have no room to be saying stuff like this. Their intention unreadable. The cruel curve to his mouth spoke for itself, however. With a jolt, you realized it was a look of poorly disguised mockery, and still you could tell it wasn't meant for you. When the cutting smile opened and the words came, pointed and pained and sharp, it was all aimed inward at himself. This whole situation, it's asinine. Asinine? I haven't known you long enough to be causing this kind of trouble. I'm quite literally a stranger. And I won't even be here long enough for that to change. As welcoming as you are here, that can't be forgotten.
I swear.
I was only ever supposed to be part of the fun, a worthwhile piece of summer scenery, someone who added to the experience, not held it back. You shouldn't have to baby me, to sit there and spend your time making me feel better when I don't keep it together. His hands were clenched on the table, the knuckles a chocolate white. The mess I am in the mornings, the drama I cause in the evenings, the person I am when the show is over. Those aspects shouldn't be any of your concern. I don't provide that support to you, do I? And how could I, when I don't know? Well, what? Pain! No, it's not fair to make you worry or worse, guilty over what happens to me. What matters is that when we're together, it's for the pleasant parts of existence. The less ideal shades of life can be managed separately. He slumped back a little in his chair, the power having gone out of his voice. That's all I wanted. I keep forgetting this is just a summer romance because I wanted more than just a summer romance. But clearly, he only wanted this summer romance. Just the happy parts. He didn't want the actual relationship part. He just wanted a fling, basically. You know? To make the love, but not actually, you know, the rest of the love part. Okay. This is where we're gonna stop for today's episode. It's painful. This is painful. This is so painful. I kind of figured it would be painful, but like, goddamn, bro. But anyway, thank you guys for watching today's episode. Stay beautiful, and I'll see you guys in the next one.